Hey everyone, my name is Sean Finlater. I'm the owner of Virtual QE, and I'm very excited to talk with you about working with staffing agencies. Before we get too deep into it, I want to talk about a few definitions. Consulting is what I consider project work, or when you do a statement of work, you may go in to do internal audits for a group of sister divisions. Might not have like a certain time to it or 40-hour a week expectations. And that's generally what I call consultants or consulting. Contracting essentially is no different from full time, other than you're a contractor, generally a 1099. That I'm using that mostly to differentiate between consultants who work in a 9 to 5 and those who do project work, which I will call consulting. Sometimes I get them mixed up, but I'll try my best to keep it straight for this. So let's talk about contracting. Here's the basic structure of how things are set up when you work with a staffing firm. You have the client who has the need for a contract and needs a QE. You have a staffing firm who is the middle person who works between you as the quality engineer and the client. What they do is they will try to identify the needs of the client and understand the job roles, the job description, what it's going to take from the client to be successful. Some do a better job at others. It's just one of those things that's the function of the staffing firm. And you can really think about the staffing firm as an extension of your company, in the sense that they're doing the business development, sales, and marketing work for you, so that all you have to do is accept the contracting work. So a little bit more about what I call indirect contracts, where the staffing firm is directly contracting you to work for the client. The staffing firm is the one who holds the client relationship. That's absolutely key to understand. You're essentially working for that staffing firm. And as a contractor, you can be either W-2 or you can be a 1099 to the staffing firm. W-2 position, generally what you're going to see is that somewhere between $8 and $10 less is what they're going to offer for a W-2 versus a 1099. And of course, that makes sense because they're going to have to pay those payroll taxes on your behalf. Every staffing firm is different, so you'll have to evaluate that. The 1099 side, of course, you'll be responsible for all your taxes and any insurance that you may require, whether health, general liability, so on and so forth. Just a quick note about a typical contract. Generally, you be on site or remote, depending on the contract, or partially remote even these days. From Monday to Friday, you're expected to work at least 40 hours a week. There could be travel once a week or every other week. If it's to be on site, you'd work essentially Monday through Friday and you'd fly out over the weekend. And generally, all of those expenses, including your hotel, your food, all of those things are charged to the client and you're reimbursed for that. The pay generally is somewhere between 35 to 70% higher than full-time, and you're generally paid bi-weekly. Most do it that way. And the length is generally 3, 6, or 12 months. And if there's a good chance that the project will go beyond 12 months, they'll usually say something, there's a strong possibility of extension. So keep that in mind. Also, one thing to keep in mind that there is, I should say, there's a duration in how long you can work with that company without a break. And that's generally to avoid any misclassifications as to whether you're a contractor or you're an employee with the IRS. So why would you work with a staffing agency? Why not go out and go get your own business? Well, you might not want to. And as a matter of fact, many of us quality consultants don't like that business development aspect of running a business. And what that allows you to do is to focus on just doing the work. And of course, if you could do that, the more time you're billing and you're working, the more money you're going to make and the more free time that you have for yourself. A great aspect about contracts is that they're pretty easy to find. Their recruiters from the staffing agencies are always looking for new candidates. They're always willing to talk to people so that they can get you in their database and keep you in mind for any future projects. Are very quick to get on board. Unlike a full-time position where you may come in and you may have 3 rounds of interviews, some may be on-site in a full day. Many of them, you'll have just a simple call with the recruiter, intro call to make sure everything matches, maybe a call with the technical person at that staffing firm. And then you may, at that point, have a hiring manager interview from the client. And then after that, it could be within a week, you could be working at the next company site. You have to do background check, drug tests in some cases, and you go from there. So it's very fast when you get these contracts. It's a great pay if you use the correct strategy. Will not be as much as you could possibly get if you were working direct. However, it can be very, very good pay. Definitely significantly more than what you would make full time. But you need to have the right strategy, because you can, and I've seen this happen, unfortunately, you're making the same as a full time person. That doesn't make much sense to me when there's so much money out there on the table that you can have whatever quality of life that you're looking for from the contractor type position and make more. So I want to talk a little bit about the average recruiter so that you understand who you're working with at the staffing firm. 99 times out of 100, they're not a quality or regulatory professional. They're not familiar necessarily with the job description or the skill set. If you're dealing with a great recruiter, they will know the terms, they'll know the terminology, but they won't know what to do or how to do what you do. You really want to focus on the logistics of the contract as much as possible when you're talking with the recruiter. They work regular business hours, so that 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. or 9 to 6. So they may not be available at some of the times that you are available, maybe early in the morning or later at night. So just keep that in mind when you're trying to schedule time. They also talk to many consultants, drag it on. You tell them what you want and what you're interested in and what's the logistics of your position, the pay, the location, those different things, so that they can log that in their system and they can move on to the next person. Because remember, they're trying to fill a contract, and every minute they spend talking with you, and if you're not the right person for the fit for the job, that's another minute that they can't talk with another client. The average recruiter, they may or may not interact with the client. It depends generally on the size of the staffing firm. If it's a large staffing firm that you're working with, they'll have their own business development people who go out and get the contracts, and then they have the recruiter side who will go out and talk with the candidates. If it's a smaller staffing firm, then that person is usually handling both. They're talking to the clients and they're searching for the candidates. And just as an FYI, they do use an applicant tracking system. So give them the information that they need to help you pop up in their database the next time a contract comes up. If you look at this, you'll see that there's this big bubble over here, which is the staffing firm entity, which has some database of candidates in it. And within that big bubble, you'll have different recruiters who have a network that is some subset of the overall staffing firm. So you may have one recruiter who may have certain candidates and another recruiter may have certain candidates, but the contract itself generally is with the staffing firm. So even though you may talk to one recruiter from a staffing firm, build relationships with some the other recruiters in that staffing firm as well. Managed service providers, also known as MSPs. This is the basic structure of an MSP. And what they do is they will have a number of staffing firms that they work with and that they have on what's very similar to like an approved supplier list. They'll get a contract from the client and they'll farm them out to these staffing firms, and whichever staffing firm comes up with the right candidate ends up getting the contract. And so there's some reasons as to why they would do this. Some of those reasons are that if the client has a lot of contract roles to fill, it's a huge burden. What ends up happening is they find it cheaper and they find it easier to essentially outsource this operation over to the MSP. And by doing that, it's going to give them more access to more contractors. They can get lower pay rates because they can get contractors from many different staffing firms all competing again for the same contract. So then that just lowers the price while extending their reach. Just to give you a look at what the network of an MSP would look like and as to why these large clients are using them. What if you're working with multiple staffing firms? Okay, now you're leveraging all of their networks, and some may overlap, some may not, but this gives the reach and the ability to find more candidates for those contracts and to find some that would take it for lower prices. The direct client relationship is where the client will work directly with the staffing firms, and they may have multiple staffing firms that they're working with, again, on the approved supplier list. And this is what they will do to have the same effect as a MSP, but they don't necessarily, in most cases, have as many contract roles that need to be filled. The smaller to mid-sized companies, they tend to work with maybe one or two staffing firms. The larger ones, they could work with as many as 20 to 30. And just to say one more point about when you're working with a staffing firm and you're looking at a contract role, when you talk to the recruiter, the contract that you're looking at, they're going to have you generally sign what's called a right to represent form. And this is so that if staffing firm 1 contacts you for the same contract that staffing firm 2 contacts you for, that this right to represent form allows that staffing firm that contacted you about this contract to be the one that represents you for this. This way you're not getting multiple staffing firms submitting you to the same contract. And this is important because what can happen is if 2 staffing firms submit you, some cases that can disqualify you from even being considered for the contract, because that's a huge headache for the MSP and for the client as to who the money should go to and who has the authority on that contract. If you ever get a right to represent form, it's not a big deal. It's very common practice. So just keep that in mind. This is just essentially like a high level view of what the process looks like. The first thing I always tell people to do is start with yourself. You need to examine yourself, examine what you're looking for, what you need, and you start there. Because when you talk to recruiters, this process could go pretty fast. So if you're not ready and you don't know what you want, end up leading to confusion, and the recruiter, may not think you're serious and may not want to submit you simply because they're not sure you're going to go through with signing the contract. And of course, that makes them look bad to the client. You'll then contact recruiters to see what contracts are out there, or recruiters will contact you. You'll jump on a recruiter call where they'll talk about the logistics, maybe a high level of the job description. Some may or may not have a technical person interview from the staffing firm just to make sure that what you say on your resume not only applies to the contract, but that you actually know what you're talking about and you didn't just write things on there. Hiring manager interview would be next, and that hiring manager, of course, would be the client hiring manager. And generally, after this interview, there's a decision on whether or not you're the right fit for the contract. Then you're on the job. All right, self-examination. What's your goals? You have to figure that out first, because you can end up getting to a situation where how you've designed your life using these contracts may not be what you would have originally intended. Skill set. You need to know your skill set. What are you good at? What are you sort of good at? What do you want to get good at, which leads you into the desired skills? Ideally, what you're looking for is a contract that has maybe 80 to 90% of your skill set and maybe 10 to 20% of the desired skills that you're looking for. The contract logistics, this is so important. How much money do you want? What is your minimum threshold to where you will not take it no matter how great the contract is? If it's too low amount of money, you have to know what that number is. And I want you to think about that very carefully. I want you to imagine you were actually getting an offer for that amount of money. And then you're saying, no, this is too much. Because a lot of people will say, oh, I would never take this. And then all of a sudden you don't give them, you don't pass them a contract to consider. And they're asking why. And it's because you said you did not accept anything lower than this number. Personal finances. Examine your personal finances. See what you need and what you don't need. Don't accept a contract that's going to put you below what you need for your personal income to sustain your family, sustain your life. Don't set your minimum threshold so high that you basically price yourself out of a lot of contracts, especially if your network of recruiters is not that big. Sometimes I'll talk to people who are interested in consulting or even some people who do consulting, and I ask them their rate, and they'll say something like, "Oh, $115 an hour or $100 an hour." And I'll say, "Okay." I come back 2 months later, and they still haven't found anything because their network of recruiters isn't big enough. I'm looking at them and I'm saying, you have waited 2 months waiting for $100 per hour. Okay, you clearly don't need it because you would have taken a lower contract because you're not that desperate. You still do want to work. You're not saying I want to take 2 months off. I did the math, and if I remember correctly, it was like them being out for 2 months at $100 an hour, and if you consider them working over a year, would have been equivalent to them taking an $80 to $83 an hour contract and working 12 months. There are a lot more contracts in that $80 to $85 range than there are at the $100 range. That is something that you want to think about and reevaluate. I think the person just felt like $100 per hour was a good number to say, as opposed to really analyzing their finances and saying, you know what, I'm actually good if I get an 80 to 85. I would definitely take the 100, but if 80 to 85 comes my way, it is actually better for me to work than to wait for that one. Maybe I'll take a shorter, maybe like a 3-month 80 to 85 contract, and I'll wait when the $100 an hour one comes. Then I want to do a 6 to 12 month of that one and do as long as possible with that. That's completely fine. Again, it's how you use the contracts is super important when it comes to how you want to manage your personal finances and what you put as your asking price. Network of recruiters. What is your network of recruiters? This determines so much because recruiters are going to have contracts that are not always available. Sometimes they're going to have contracts that are right for you, and sometimes they're going to have some that are off your skill set. You're not available at the same time that contract's available, so then you're going to have to talk to another recruiter who has contracts, and it may be the same situation. You need enough of those recruiters in your network so that when you're ready to have a contract, you can get the pay, the location, the skills, the desired skills, all of those things that you want that fits into how you want to design your life using the contract work. Very big is the why. Why are you doing this? Why are you contracting? Are you taking like a balanced approach where you're trying to do direct consulting and develop your own business, but you're using the contract work to just bring in steady cash flow? So that's something that you need to make sure you're solid on. Again, here's some pay expectations of what you might expect. Again, it can range outside of this depending on your skill set, whether you're willing to go on site, whether you're remote, depending on your experience. It can fall outside of these brackets. But in general, you can expect to be somewhere in this range, okay? And a quick way to figure out your hourly rate is just to divide whatever your salary is that you're looking at in the brackets by 2,000. It really a lot of it depends on the skill set and the ability of person contracting to negotiate, and then also the network. That could be something that you do. I mean, again, always be upfront, but you could use that bidding strategy. It's completely fine and completely accepted. Just make sure, though, if you do use that strategy, let me just be clear on this. If you use that strategy, if you tell that recruiter a number and they ask you specifically, they say, hey, if I get you $10 more an hour than the other one, will you accept this one even if they keep their offer? The answer is yes. You need to commit to that. If there's a caveat to it, you need to give the caveat. Yes, I would, as long as they don't match it. The worst thing that you could do to a recruiter is make them look bad in front of their client. And one of the things that makes them look the worst is if they're telling the client that they can get the deal done if they get a certain number, and then you back out when they actually get it for you. That just makes the recruiter look extremely bad. Tell them if they want a chance at getting you for the contract, they have to at least come up $10 an hour. At least that way the recruiter can go to the client and say $10 more an hour, then we have a chance at getting them. It sets the right expectation with the client.